You shouldn't be here.
I know. I know. I wanna be with you.
Steam. That was the first thing. Steam thick enough to lean on, rolling off the shower tiles of the Burr Gymnasium locker room, and through it, a voice with Atlanta poured all the way through it. You gonna stare at that playbook all night, Thorne, or you gonna look at me when I'm talking to you? Marcus Thorne, 18 years old, looked up. Devin Price stood at the next locker with a towel around his waist and water still mapping the broad architecture of his shoulders, grinning like he already knew something Marcus hadn't admitted to himself yet. The locker room smelled of eucalyptus liniment and athletic tape, and underneath it, faint, the dryer sheet warmth that followed Devin everywhere like weather. "I'm looking," Marcus said. And he was. That was the problem. Devin's grin widened by 1 degree. 1. Marcus measured it the way he measured everything: load, span, tolerance. "Coach says you got the softest hands on the roster." Devin pulled his shirt down slow like punctuation. "I keep wondering what else they're good at. You draw, right?" The whistle from the corridor split the steam in half. Devin laughed, low, and walked toward the sound, and Marcus sat there with his pulse doing something unarchitectural. 3 weeks. He'd been at Howard 3 weeks, and already the structure of him was failing inspection. 3 weeks earlier, the Greyhound out of Baltimore smelled of diesel and someone's cold fried chicken, and Marcus rode the whole hour with his father's trumpet case upright between his knees like a passenger. He hadn't opened it since the funeral. He carried it anyway. Some loads you don't put down just because they're heavy. Some loads are the only proof the building ever stood. In the duffel at his feet, 2 letters. The first was embossed: full athletic scholarship, Howard University football. The words so heavy on the page they nearly tore through it. Wide receiver, fast hands, faster feet, a body that did what bodies from his block were expected to do. The second letter he had printed himself at the Enoch Pratt Free Library and folded so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. His acceptance into the architecture program. Provisional, conditional. His, if he could carry both. His mother had pressed her palm flat against his chest at the station, right over the heartbeat. "Your daddy blew everything he had into that horn and kept the silence for us," she said. "Don't you do that. Don't you keep the silence." The bus crossed into the district as the sun came up over the row houses, and Marcus watched the city assemble itself out of the dark, cornice by cornice, line by line, and felt, for the first time since the funeral, something in his chest that wasn't grief. It was scaffolding. August in Washington, D.C. doesn't arrive. It occupies. The heat stood on the yard like a body, and the yard didn't care. Marcus came up the walk with the duffel on one shoulder and the trumpet case in the opposite hand, and Howard University happened to him all at once. Drum lines practicing somewhere out of sight. A girl laughing so freely it sounded like a dare. Upperclassmen in fraternity jackets despite the heat, moving like they owned the deeds to the ground. Frederick Douglass Memorial Hall held its colonnade against the white sky, and Marcus stopped walking. He counted the columns. He couldn't help it. He found the rhythm in them, the intervals, the discipline, the way the building said permanence without raising its voice. Around him, hundreds of black students crossed in every direction, every one of them somebody's miracle, and for one disorienting second, Marcus felt the thing he would spend 17 years learning to wall off. Belonging, arriving uninvited, asking to be let in. He shifted the trumpet case in his grip and kept walking. Structure first, feeling later. That was the order of operations his life had taught him. Drew Hall, 4th floor, room 4B, and the door was already open. The smell reached him before the introduction did. Hot oil, cornmeal, something fried in violation of at least 4 university housing codes. A broad-shouldered figure crouched over a contraband hot plate balanced on a milk crate, turning catfish with surgical focus and bare feet. "You, Thorne?" The young man didn't look up. "Wide receiver Thorne with the 4.340. "My condolences. I'm the linebacker they assigned to keep you alive. Devin Price, Atlanta." He flipped the fish. "You hungry?" "I ate on the bus." "That's not what I asked." Devin looked up then, bright, expressive eyes, a grin that arrived like a porch light coming on. He took in the pressed black turtleneck, the trousers with the deliberate crease, the trumpet case. Man dressed like a chess piece, carrying a horn, telling me he's not hungry. "I'd sit down anyway." Marcus sat. The catfish was, objectively, measurably, the best thing he had eaten since before the funeral. He didn't say so. Devin watched him not say so and handed him a second piece without comment. And that, the without comment, Wobu was the subverse brick of something Marcus had no blueprint for. 5:45 in the morning, and Green Stadium was still holding yesterday's heat in its turf like a grudge. Two-a-days broke bodies down to their load-bearing truths. Marcus learned the roster by collision. Who hit high? Who hit scared? Who hit like they had something at home they were running from? He ran routes until the numbers painted on the field smeared in his vision, and his hands, the soft hands, coach's favorite phrase, kept finding the ball the way they found a pencil line. Exactly, and without permission, from his thinking mind. It was Devin who hit him hardest in the third hour, a clean legal shoulder that put Marcus flat against the earth with the sky ringing above him. A hand arrived in his field of vision, broad, steady, open. "Get up, chess piece." Devin hauled him to his feet and held the grip half a second past necessary, reading him. "You hit the ground wrong. You fall like you're protecting something." "My hands," Marcus said. "Nah." Devin tapped Marcus once on the chest plate, right over the heart, and jogged back to the line. "That ain't where your hands are." He found the drafting room on a Thursday, between the weight room and a film session, following a hand-lettered sign down a corridor of the School of Architecture like a man following a smell of water. 20 drafting tables in afternoon light. T-squares hung in rows. The room was empty, and it was the loudest silence Marcus had ever stood in. The silence of a place where things got made. He should have left. He had 40 minutes and a quad to cross. Instead, he set down his helmet bag, took the pencil from behind his ear, and began to draw the stadium, not as it was, but as it could be. The bleacher load redistributed, the sight lines corrected. A cantilevered shade structure for the east stands where the elders sat sun-punished every home game. When he surfaced, an hour had died without his consent. Practice film had started without him, and the drawing on the vellum was the truest sentence he had spoken since Baltimore. Behind him, unnoticed, a man in a charcoal three-piece suit stood in the doorway, utterly still, watching the way a collector watches an auction lot he has already decided to own. Architecture. 101 met in a lecture hall that smelled of chalk dust and ambition, and Dr. Alistair Vaughan did not enter it so much as annex it. A tall, imposing man in his late 40s, polished walnut-toned skin, silver threading through close-cropped hair, the charcoal three-piece fitting like a second skeleton. He set one fountain pen on the lectern, parallel to its edge, and looked out at 90 freshmen as if conducting a structural survey of each one. Every building is an argument, Vaughn said. No notes, no greeting. It argues against gravity, against weather, against time, against the poverty of imagination of the people who commissioned it. Most of you will lose that argument politely your whole careers. He let the silence carry the load. I am only interested in the ones who intend to win it. His eyes moved across the hall and stopped. Marcus felt it physically, like a plumb line dropped through the crown of his head, on the freshman in the back row with a playbook under his drawing pad. Mr. Thorne, Vaughn said, reading the roster without looking down. Football, I'm told. Tell me, what is the span of a man's reach? The hall turned. Marcus held the gaze. Whatever the foundation can carry, he said. Something flickered in Vaughn's calculating dark eyes. Appetite filed as approval. Sit closer next week, Vaughn said, and resumed the lecture, and Marcus sat in the held breath quiet of having been chosen and not yet knowing the price of it. After class, the hall draining, Vaughn stood at the lectern capping the fountain pen with both hands, a small ceremony. The stadium drawing, he said, not looking up. The cantilevered shade structure. You left it in the drafting room. Marcus stopped mid-aisle. I didn't sign it. You didn't have to. Athletes draw fantasies of stadiums. Architects draw corrections of them. Yours was a correction. Vaughn looked up then, and the full weight of his attention was a climate. Howard has produced the finest black architects in this country's history, Mr. Thorne, and this institution still makes most of them choose between survival and vision. I do not intend to watch it make you choose between a football and a future. The football is the future. It's paying for the rest. For now. Vaughn slid the rolled vellum across the lectern. He had brought it, had carried Marcus's drawing here, a fact that landed somewhere between flattery and trespass. My door is open Thursdays. Most students knock for years and never see the inside of it. He left. The room kept the scent of him, black pepper, patchouli, old money, the cologne of a man who had never once been questioned in a room he chose to enter. The bruise had risen along Marcus's ribs in the shape of someone's helmet, and Devin found it in the locker room the way he found everything, without asking. Lift your arm. It wasn't a request. Devin turned him by the shoulder with two fingers, frowning at the bruise like it had personally disrespected him, and reached for the roll of tape. Trainer can do it, Marcus said. Trainer's got 40 bodies. I got one. The tape went on in smooth, overlapping passes. Devin's hands unhurried, his breath close enough to count. The locker room had mostly emptied. Somebody's shower ran. The fluorescent light hummed one half-step flat. Marcus stood very still, the way he stood when feeling something had become unavoidable. Devin's palm flattened once against the finished tape, against his ribs, against the architecture of him, and stayed a second longer than medicine required. There, Devin said, quieter than before. Protected. Their eyes met in the narrow mirror bolted inside Marcus's locker door, and neither of them filed the moment unto teammates, and both of them let the whistle from the hallway pretend to end it. Midnight, in room 4. B, the hot plate ticking as it cooled, and Devin talked the way other people breathed. About Atlanta, about his grandmother's kitchen where being fed and being loved were the same transaction. About wanting medicine, pre-med on a football body, a man planning to spend his life putting people back together. Your pops play? Devin nodded at the trumpet case standing in the corner like a guest who never sat down. He played. Marcus turned a page of the playbook he wasn't reading. Jazz, Baltimore clubs. He was... The sentence reached the gap where his father's life had been and stopped at the unbuilt edge of it. He kept the silence for us. That's what my mother says. Devin didn't fill the pause. That was the thing about him Marcus was learning. He treated silence like a room you could share instead of a wall you had to scale. One day, Devin said finally to the ceiling, easy as Sunday, "You gon' tell me the whole blueprint of you, Thorn. I'm patient. I'm from Atlanta. We marinate." Marcus, in the dark, did something his face had nearly forgotten the engineering for. He smiled. Thursday. The door was heavy, oiled walnut, and it opened before Marcus finished knocking. Vaughn's office was a thesis statement, floor-to-ceiling shelves with first edition standing at attention, a drafting table by the window tilted to catch the north light, framed photographs, Vaughn with mayors, Vaughn with deans, Vaughn breaking ground in a hard hat that had never met dirt. The air was black pepper and patchouli with an underline of leather, and the afternoon light came through the blinds in disciplined parallel lines, laying bars of gold across the floor. "Sit," Vaughn said and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water as if it were a ritual older than both of them. "Tell me what you saw on the yard your first day." Marcus told him, the columns, the intervals, permanence without a raised voice. Vaughn listened with his fingers steepled, and when Marcus finished, he nodded once, slow, like a verdict. 17 years I have taught here," he said. "I see one of you a decade. The ones who don't look at buildings. The ones who read them." He slid a key across the desk. Brass. Unremarkable. Irreversible. "The drafting room. After hours. Locks at 9. You'll have until midnight. Tell no one, because I have told no one." A secret Marcus would understand much later is a load-bearing wall. Whoever installs it owns the structure. He took the key. The collision came on a Tuesday, the way collisions do. Scheduled by no one, felt by everyone. Film session ran long. Coach Greer stood at the whiteboard diagramming a defense, and Marcus, on the back row, was diagramming a load path on the inside cover of his playbook. And Greer, who saw everything, that was his entire job, seeing, stopped talking. "Thorn, you drawing in my film room?" The room went still as poured concrete. "Yes, sir." A long pause. Greer was a fair man, which made him more dangerous than a cruel one. "Your scholarship says football, son. Says it in writing. I've seen them try to ride 2 horses before. The horses don't mind, but the man gets torn in half." He turned back to the whiteboard. "Bird Gym, 6 a.m. You can think about your priorities at altitude. Stadium stairs at dawn, alone, lungs burning, the city laid out below in its grids and its monuments and its unfinished arguments. And Marcus, climbing, hating how clearly he could see it. Every beautiful line of a skyline built by men who had been allowed to choose only oneself. Devin found out about the 6 a.m. stairs because Devin found out about everything. and at 5:40 he was waiting in the parking lot in his cousin's borrowed Buick with 2 foam cups of gas station coffee on the dash. Get in. You can suffer with caffeine like a grown man. They drove the long way, down Georgia Avenue with the windows open, the city still wearing its night clothes. Devin talked about nothing. A song on the radio, a linebacker at Hampton with a vendetta, and Marcus realized somewhere around the reservoir that Devin had engineered the entire morning so that Marcus would not climb those stairs feeling punished. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked. He meant it as a survey. It came out as a confession. Devin kept his eyes on the road, easy, both wrists draped on the wheel. "Because you're the only man I ever met," he said, "who acts like being cared about is a structural risk." A beat, the Atlanta grin. Softer at this hour. "I like risk. I play linebacker." The midnight drafting room became a country with a population of 1, and then, increasingly, 2. Vaughn began appearing, Tuesdays mostly. He would materialize among the drafting tables at 10, jacket off, sleeves never rolled. A man who removed formality the way other men put it on, and stand over Marcus's shoulder while the radiators ticked. "Your line is afraid here." The fountain pen hovered over the vellum, never touching. "You drew this corner the way your scholarship wants it. Draw it the way you want it." He was brilliant. That was the trap's first tooth. He was right. Under Vaughn's attention, Marcus's drafting matured by years inside of weeks, and the attention itself began to feel structural, weight-bearing, necessary. "You don't belong on a field, Mr. Thorne," Vaughn said one midnight quietly, standing close enough that the black pepper and old money replaced the room's own air. "A field is where this country prefers to look at you. A skyline is where it will be forced to." The sentence was a master sentence. 1 part truth, 1 part flattery, all parts isolation. Marcus heard only the truth in it. He was 18. The truth was the bait. First home game. Green Stadium under lights, and the night came up off the field in waves of noise and barbecue smoke and brass. The Showtime band made the air itself percussive. Marcus stood in the tunnel with his heart going like a pile driver, and Devin's helmet leaned in against his, face mask to face mask, close enough that the rest of the stadium went out of focus. "Hey, chess piece." Devin's eyes through the cage, bright, lit, alive. "Tonight, you ain't got to be but one thing. Fly." Third quarter, broken play, the ball arriving high and wrong, and Marcus left the ground. And for 2 airborne seconds, there was no scholarship, no grief, no trumpet case, no key in his sock drawer, nothing but span. And the soft hands did what they were built for. Touchdown, Howard. The stadium detonated. Devin reached him first, took Marcus's helmet in both hands, pressed their face masks together, screaming joy with his whole Atlanta chest. And Marcus, helmet held like that, hands gripping Devin's jersey at the ribs, laughed. Actually laughed. Under the lights in front of 11,000 witnesses, none of whom knew they were watching the most honest moment of his year. The locker room after a win is a carnival. By midnight, it's a chapel. Marcus stayed late retaping his wrist and replaying the catch, and Devin stayed late because Marcus stayed late. Steam again. The hum of the one flat fluorescent light. Devin sat down on the bench close, the kind of close that has a question in it, towel around his neck. Victory still coming off him like heat off the turf. That catch. Devin shook his head slow. "Man, you hung up there like you didn't owe gravity nothing." "Everything obeys load," Marcus said. "Even me." "Yeah?" Devin's voice dropped out of the carnival register and into something bare. He reached over and took Marcus's half-taped wrist in both hands, finished the wrap himself, slow, exact, his thumb crossing the pulse point once. Once, like a man checking a foundation for a heartbeat. The room shrank to the span of the bench. What's it telling you to do right now? The pulse under Devin's thumb answered for him, traitorously, at pace. Footsteps, an equipment manager's keys. The two of them moved apart along seams that had not existed 10 seconds earlier, and Devin laughed at nothing, and Marcus studied the floor like a site survey. And the moment folded itself away unfinished. Load applied. Load not yet born. The call came that Sunday, his mother's voice flat with the effort of flatness. They were selling the house. His father's debts had outlived him. The row house on Carey Street, the stoop, the kitchen where the horn used to sound through the floorboards, sold to cover a silence. Marcus took the news standing, said the right things, hung up and sat down on the floor of room 4B between the beds with his back against the frame, in the dark, in the rain ticking against the window, holding the trumpet case across his knees like a body. He didn't hear Devin come in. He heard the floor take Devin's weight beside him. No questions. That was the mercy of it. No questions, no fixing, no Atlanta charm. Devin sat down on the floor of the dark and put his arms around Marcus Thorne, around the trumpet case and all, and held on. Marcus went rigid, every joint load-tested, every wall manned, and Devin simply stayed, smelling of dryer sheets and rain, one hand flat against Marcus's back like a hand on set concrete, checking the cure. And the structure failed, quietly, the way the strongest ones do. Not a collapse, a settling. Marcus's forehead came down to Devin's shoulder and his breath broke in half, and for the length of one rainstorm, somebody held the weight, and it was not him. No one had ever held him without asking what they'd get in return. He was 18 years old, and he had not known until 2 a.m. on a Sunday that he was starving. Morning made strangers of them gently. Devin was at the hot plate when Marcus woke, making eggs with his back turned, narrating yesterday's game like nothing had been demolished and rebuilt overnight. Marcus dressed with the exactness of a man reinstalling himself. Neither named the thing. The thing sat at breakfast with them anyway, drinking from its own cup. "You good?" Devin asked finally, plate to plate, eyes direct. "I'm structural," Marcus said. Devin studied him and let it hold. "Aight," he said soft. "But for the record, Thorne, that thing last night?" He turned back to the eggs. "That wasn't weakness. That was load transfer. Even I know that much architecture." Marcus left for class with his walls repointed and one brick somewhere low in the foundation deliberately left loose, and didn't notice that he was, for the first time in his life, walking around with an unlocked door in him. He would notice. Someone else noticed first. Vaughn noticed the way barometers notice. That Thursday, the office light seemed warmer, the parallel bars of sun lying like rulers across the rug. And on the desk, wrapped in plain butcher paper with drafting tape corners, a package with no occasion attached. "Open it." A monograph. Mies van der Rohe, first edition, the cloth cover worn soft as the creases of a letter folded too many times. Inside the flyleaf, an inscription in fountain ink, the hand impeccable. For MT, who already understands that less is only more when one has first owned everything. AV. "I can't take this." "You can't refuse it. There's a difference, and the difference is manners." Vaughn came around the desk and set the book back into Marcus's hands, his own hands closing briefly over them, dry, deliberate, ringless. Pressure applied and released like a test of materials. Great men are not discovered, Mr. Thorne. They are built by other great men, brick by brick, privately. Walking back across campus, the book heavy in his bag as a cornerstone, Marcus felt the two warmths confuse themselves in him. The one from room 4B that asked for nothing, and this one, which had begun, invisibly, to invoice. The offer came framed as inevitability. The Obsidian Fellowship, Vaughn said, midnight drafting room, the city dark beyond the windows. My private atelier, one student, summer in my firm's DC office, my name on your recommendations, my rooms at the AIA Gala. The last 4 fellows are now licensed in 7 states. He paused at the exact load center of the sentence. It would, of course, be impossible alongside football. There it was, the choice, installed by a master craftsman so that it looked like a doorway and functioned as a wall. The scholarship pays for everything, Marcus said. Without it, I'm back on the bus. Money is a solvable problem for a man with the right patron. Vaughn's voice did not change registers for this sentence, which is what made it dangerous. Poverty of patronage is the only poverty that has ever held our people's genius down. Let me solve the solvable problem, Marcus. His first name. 61 days of Mr. Thorne, and now, at midnight, in an empty building, his first name, deployed like a key turning. Think, Vaughn said, gathering his coat. But not slowly. Greatness has a schedule. Devon heard fellowship and put his fork down, which for Devon was a seismic event. Run that back. He gave you a key, a first edition, and a money promise. And the one condition is the thing that comes with 40 teammates and a coach who counts your heartbeats. Devon leaned back against the dorm window, arms crossed over the Howard Bison hoodie, bright eyes gone unusually still. Marcus, I'm pre-med, not pre-law, but I know anatomy. That man looks at you like a building he wants to buy. He looks at me like I'm talented. Both things can be true. That's what makes it work. Devon's voice stayed level, which was its own alarm. My grandmother had a name for men like that. Said some folks don't rob you. They renovate you. Move the walls around till the house don't know itself, and call it improvement. He looked at the trumpet case in the corner, then back. You finally got a door open in you, man. I watched it happen. I'd hate for the first thing through it to be him. You don't know him. No, Devon said quietly. But I know you. And you're worth more than what he's paying. The argument did what arguments do in load-bearing friendships. It didn't collapse anything. It introduced a crack too fine to see and too deep to caulk. Marcus stopped narrating his Thursdays. Devon stopped asking, which was worse. They still ran routes in tandem, still ate at the same hot plate, still moved around room 4B in their settled choreography. But the silence between them changed material, from the shared kind to the soundproof kind, and both of them, trained in impact, pretended not to feel the building shift. In the language Marcus thought in, he understood it precisely. Devon had applied an honest load, and Marcus had responded like every structure his childhood ever taught him. He had transferred the weight to the colder wall. At night, he lay awake between the two warmths. One asked for nothing, and was therefore terrifying. Care without a contract was a span Marcus had no tables for. The other asked for everything, and was therefore legible. He'd been raised on rooms where love was conditional. Vaughn's arithmetic felt like home. That was the deepest tooth of the trap, and not one soul in the world had taught Marcus Thorne to see it. November now. The drafting room at dusk, radiators ticking, the sky over the city going the color of a healing bruise. Marcus worked alone on the fellowship portfolio he had not yet admitted he was assembling. A community recreation center for Carey Street, the row house block they'd sold out from under his mother, redrawn as something no bank could foreclose. Roof spans like open hands, light wells, a music room, south-facing, sized exactly for a man and a trumpet, though he told himself the dimensions were a coincidence. It was the best thing he had ever drawn, and he had drawn it for the dead and the displaced. And he was 18 and exhausted and lit from inside by the work. The most defenseless condition a builder can be found in. He didn't hear the door. He had given up hearing the door. The door belonged to Vaughn now, like the room, like the hours, like he would understand later, much later, in a hospital of a different kind, like the boy at the drafting table. You drew a music room, Vaughn's voice said behind him, close, for a building with no music program. It's for... Marcus stopped. It's load balancing. The south wall needed program. No. The word was almost tender. It's for your father. It's the finest lie in the whole drawing. Never explain it to a client. Vaughn shed his jacket onto the stool, formality removed, the second skeleton set aside, and bent over the drawing beside him, and for an hour he was nothing but brilliant. This is the part the cautionary tales leave out, the part Marcus would never be able to explain to anyone who wasn't in the room. It was the best hour of teaching he would receive in 5 years of architectural education. Vaughn rebuilt his roof spans with him, corrected his light wells, found the structural flaw in the west elevation, and handed Marcus the discovery of it, generous as a father, patient as a patron, the fountain pen hovering, never touching, his voice low and certain in the ticking radiator dark. There, Vaughn said at last. The drawing between them was finished, and it was glorious, and they had built it together, and that, together, was the trap's final tooth, machined to fit exactly the hole in a fatherless boy. The room had gone full dark beyond the drafting lamp, one pool of light, 2 men inside it. You see what we are when no one interrupts, Vaughn said quietly. He was not looking at the drawing. Marcus, 18, lit from inside, defenseless, said, yes. He meant the work. He would spend years rehearsing that he had meant the work. Vaughn moved with the economy of a man who never reached for anything that hadn't already been arranged to be in reach. A hand, dry and deliberate, came to rest at the back of Marcus's neck. The architect's grip, the way you steady a level, and the scent of black pepper and patchouli and old money closed over the drafting lamp's pool of light, and Dr. Alistair Vaughn kissed him. For 1 second, and the count of it would torment Marcus for 17 years. Was it 1 second? Was it 2? What is the load rating of a second? For 1 second, Marcus stood inside the kiss the way you stand inside a building in an earthquake. Total stillness, structural awe, every alarm in the architecture ringing at frequencies he had not yet learned to hear. The fountain pen rolled off the drafting table and hit the floor in the silence like a beam giving way. Somewhere across campus, a hot plate warmed a dinner going cold on a windowsill. Somewhere in a dorm room corner, a trumpet case stood in the dark, keeping its silence. And in one pool of lamplight, in an empty building to which exactly 2 people held keys, the future architect of the Thorn Walls, every wall Elias Vance would spend a lifetime learning to unbuild, was, in this moment, being drafted. Marcus's hand found the edge of the table. Whether it was bracing to push away or only bracing, the dark of the drafting room kept that answer.
Wait, Professor, aren't you married? Marcus, where have you been?
The kiss ended the way a stress test ends. Not with a sound, but with a number. Marcus Thorne put his hand flat against the drafting table and pushed back 8 inches, the most expensive 8 inches he had ever measured, and the single pool of lamplight held the 2 of them inside it like a verdict not yet read aloud. That, Dr. Alistair Vaughan said, unhurried, reaching for nothing, capping nothing, was not a question. It was a hypothesis. The black pepper and patchouli and old money hung in the air where his mouth had been. Marcus's pulse was doing something unarchitectural, something with no load tables, and he hated it the way he hated any structure he could not name. I should go. You should. Vaughn stepped back, granting the distance as though it had always been his to give. The doors lock at 9. You have a key. A pause, engineered to the millimeter. Nothing happened here that you did not already know was being built, Mr. Thorne. I merely set the cornerstone. Marcus gathered the rolled vellum, the first edition monograph, the whole weight of the man's attention, and walked out into the November cold with his father's silence sitting in his chest like a second skeleton. Behind him, unhurried, stood a man who had just learned exactly how long Marcus Thorne would stand perfectly still inside a thing that frightened him. 1 second. 2. The dark of the drafting room kept the count, and would keep it for 17 years. He did not take the shortest route back to Drew Hall. He took the route with the most corners because corners were decisions, and decisions were the opposite of standing still. The cold scoured the campus clean. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth once, hard, then made himself stop, because a man who keeps touching the evidence is a man building a monument to it. By the time he reached the quad, he had done what he always did with a load he could not carry. He relabeled it. Not a kiss, a misunderstanding of mentorship, a great man's clumsy reach toward a talent he wanted to protect. File it under generosity. Pour the footing. Move on. It would hold for exactly 6 days. Marcus did not yet know that the things you mislabel do not disappear. They only wait, patient as patrons, for the inspection you were too young to schedule. Devin Price could read a body the way other men read box scores. He looked up from his anatomy textbook the second Marcus came through the door of room 4B, and something in his easy Atlanta face went still. You walked here slow, Devin said, not a question. You only walk slow when you're carrying. I'm structural. Yeah, you keep saying that. Devin set the book face down, a small surrender of his own evening. You've been wearing a face like a closed bank for a week, man. Whatever Mr. Three-Piece is teaching you up in that room after dark, don't. It came out harder than Marcus meant, and the word landed in the middle of the room and sat there. Devin let it. That was the terrible mercy of him. He never rushed to fill the silence, so the silence filled with everything Marcus would not say. "Ite," Devon said finally, soft, and picked his book back up. But the loose brick in Marcus's foundation, the one Devon had set in motion weeks ago, shifted 1 more millimeter in the dark. The brass key lived in his sock drawer now, under the folded acceptance letter, and Marcus could feel it through the wood the way you feel a draft through a wall you swore was sealed. He skipped Thursday. He told himself it was the portfolio, the practice film, the test on Monday. Reasons stacked like sandbags against a thing he would not name as flood. On Friday, a folded note appeared under the door of 4B. No envelope, the handwriting impeccable, the fountain ink the color of dried blood. "Greatness does not flinch, Mr. Thorne. The door remains open. A.V." Marcus read it twice, then placed it in the drawer beside the key, where the dangerous things were learning to keep each other company. Practice was the only church he trusted because, on the field, the loads were honest and the collisions were legal, and nothing wanted anything from him that a body could not pay. He played angry that week. He ran routes like he was trying to outrun a scent. When Devon put him on the turf with a clean shoulder, Marcus got up before the hand arrived, which both of them noticed and neither named. Coach Greer watched it all from under the brim of his cap, saying nothing until the last whistle. Then, low, only to Marcus. "You're playing angry, son. Angry's a fuel. It ain't a plan. A man who builds on it ends up living in the fire he lit." Marcus pulled his helmet off and looked at the cold Washington sky and thought, with the part of him that never stopped drawing, about every beautiful building he'd ever loved that had started as somebody's controlled burn. Vaughn did not chase. Predators with patience never do. He simply appeared on Monday in the corridor outside the lecture hall, fell into step beside Marcus as if they had agreed to walk, and corrected the architecture of the entire week in 4 sentences. "You've been avoiding the studio. Good. It means you felt the weight of it. Lesser men feel nothing. That is why they build nothing." He let a door swing for a passing student, courtly, lethal. "What happened was a measurement of seriousness, Marcus. I do not waste it on boys who will spend their lives losing the argument politely." And there it was, the kiss recast as a credential, the trespass reframed as proof of Marcus's rare worth, the shame turned inside out and handed back to him as flattery. It was the finest piece of construction Marcus had ever watched a man do in real time, and he was 18 and he could not see the scaffolding for the cathedral. "Thursday," Vaughn said, not asking. "We have a fellowship to win." He was gone before Marcus could answer, which was the entire point. Masters never wait for the yes. They install it. By Friday, Devon had had enough of watching his roommate disappear inside his own face. Get dressed. Real clothes, not your funeral chess piece situation. He was already pulling the borrowed Buick keys off the hook. "My cousin plays bass at a spot on U Street. Basement joint. Old heads. Real horns. Catfish in the back that'll make you forgive God. I have a test. You have a face like a closed bank and a soul that needs a saxophone." Devon tossed him his good coat. "Monday's for the test. Tonight's for your blood pressure. Come on, chess piece. Let somebody put the king in motion for once." Marcus put on the coat. He told himself it was for Devon. He was still, at 18, very bad at knowing what he did for himself. The velvet underground announced itself the way the best secret rooms do, not with a sign, but with a sound coming up through the sidewalk. They went down, iron stairs, a red bulb at the landing, a door that breathed warm air and brass and the particular incense of 100 spilled bourbons soaked into a century of wood. Each step took them further under the city, and Marcus felt the weight of D.C. pass overhead. The monuments, the marble, the men who built it, all to be looked at. Until there was only this: a low brick vault, candlelit, where the city kept the part of itself it did not put on postcards. At the bottom, the room opened like a held breath, and Marcus Thorne, who measured everything, stopped measuring. It was a room that listened. He understood that before he understood anything else. A trio worked the low stage, upright bass, brushed drums, a piano with 3 keys that stuck and were loved anyway. A woman in a column of bronze silk stood at the microphone with her eyes closed, and when she sang, the whole vault leaned toward her the way the colonnade on the yard leaned toward permanence. And on a stand at the edge of the stage, unplayed, gleaming under the candlelight, sat a trumpet. Just sitting there, waiting for a man who had stepped out for a cigarette, or for a god, or for a ghost. Marcus's chest did the thing it had been refusing to do since Baltimore. Devon, already drifting toward a corner where men were shuffling dominoes, looked back once and saw it, and, in the only true grace of the night, let him have the room alone. He saw the soldier before he saw the man. At the far curve of the bar sat a young man in a Navy ROTC dress uniform, every crease regulation sharp, every brass button polished to a small private sun. 20 maybe, caramel skin, a military buzz cut, a strong, wide, square jaw, built to take orders and give them. Broad swimmer's chest, narrow hips, the upright bearing of someone trained to scan every room for threats. And his hands were shaking, just slightly. A tremor around the glass of water. He was not drinking. The kind of tremble a body makes when it has spent the entire day holding itself at attention and has finally, in a basement where no one knows him, been allowed to set the weight down, and found that it cannot remember how. Under the bourbon and the brass, when the door behind Marcus swung, a thread of scent reached him, something clean and aquatic, lavender and sea breeze. Davidoff cool water. The cologne of a young man who has not yet learned to hide behind subtlety. Marcus, who knew everything about load and nothing about longing, sat down 2 stools away because it was the only empty seat. He would tell himself that for years, too. Then the man who owned the trumpet came back. He was old, this player, with hands like cracked riverbeds and a stillness that cost decades to earn. He lifted the horn without ceremony, set it to his mouth, and played a single long note that opened in the brick vault like a door into a room Marcus had spent 5 years bricking shut. It was his father's sound. Not the song, the silence inside the song. The held grief that Baltimore clubs had been built to hold. The thing his mother meant when she pressed her palm to his chest and said, "Don't you keep the silence." The note bent and broke and resolved. And Marcus Thorne sat at a bar 2 stools from a trembling soldier and could not breathe through the precision of how much he missed a man he had never once heard say, "I love you." His eyes burned. He did not let them spill. But the wall he had repointed all week developed somewhere below the waterline, a hairline crack the exact shape of a horn. In the corner, a bone slammed the table, and 4 men roared, and Devon's laugh rose out of the noise, unmistakable. Atlanta poured all the way through it. He had found his people in 4 minutes flat, the way he found everything, without asking permission. He caught Marcus's eye across the room, lifted his chin toward the bar, toward the soldier, a small, unmistakable go on. Then he turned back to the game and gave his friend the gift of being unobserved. It would have been easy to call it luck, the empty stool, the absent friend, the playing of the horn. Marcus would learn much later that the architecture of a life is mostly made of the doors other people hold open while pretending not to. "You're not drinking that," Marcus said, because it was true and because the truth was the only sentence he trusted. The soldier did not startle, which startled Marcus. He simply turned his head with the controlled economy of the trained and considered him. The pressed dark clothes, the rigid posture, the architect's stillness answering the soldier's. "I'm on report at 0600, the young man said. His voice was compressed, every word load-bearing, nothing wasted. "Water's the only thing in here that won't cost me." "Then why come to a bar?" A long beat. The horn breathed behind them. "Same reason as you, probably." He nodded once, barely, at Marcus's face, at whatever the music had done to it. "To sit somewhere the rules can't see me and find out what's left." "Julian," the soldier said and offered no hand, because a handshake in the open was a record, and a man in that uniform learned early which gestures could be entered into evidence. "Marcus." They sat with it. 2 guarded men in a listening room, each recognizing in the other the particular posture of someone holding a self in escrow. "My father's a general," Julian said at last, to the bar, not to Marcus, the way you confess to the dark. 3 stars. He picked the academy before I could walk. The uniform fits. Everybody says how well the uniform fits. His jaw worked. The tremor crossed his hand again and he pressed it flat to the wood to still it. The distance between what I'm supposed to be and what I am. Some nights, it's louder than the horn. Marcus, who built his whole life on the gap between the body the block expected and the buildings he saw in his sleep, felt the sentence land in him like a plumb line finding true. He did not say me too. He did not have to. Julian heard it in the silence, because Julian had been trained above all else to hear what was not being said. "He doesn't know," Marcus said. It was not a guess. "He can't know." Julian's eyes went to the stairs, the reflex of a man who has rehearsed his own exits in every room he's ever entered. The general doesn't lose, not battles, not arguments, not sons. If he found out what I am, he wouldn't grieve it. He'd correct it. He said the word correct, and Marcus thought unwillingly of another man and another word for the same surgery. He'd have me reassigned, disappeared into some posting where the climate does the disciplining for him. So you wear it. So I wear it. Sharp, every crease. You learn to love the uniform a little because the uniform is the only part of you that's allowed in the daylight. He finally lifted the water, drank, set it down level. "What's your uniform, Marcus?" Marcus looked at his own hands, the soft hands, Coach's favorite phrase, the hands that caught footballs and drew impossible roofs. "A scholarship," he said, "and a man who thinks he's tailoring me a better one." The woman in bronze silk opened her eyes for the next number, and it was as though she had been listening to them the whole time and chosen the song as commentary. It was an old one, slow, a torch standard about loving in a city that would not let you say the name out loud. She sang it, without spectacle, the way you tell the truth to one person in a crowded room, and Marcus and Julian sat in the candlelight not looking at each other in the specific charged way that two people only manage when looking would say everything. Their hands rested on the bar, 8 inches apart, the same 8 inches Marcus had measured in the drafting room, except these were not a verdict. These were a question neither of them was free to ask. The trumpet folded itself around her voice. The vault held them both. Devin found him at the bar an hour later, easy, grinning, $1 of dominoes richer, and the grin caught for half a second when he clocked the soldier, the 8 inches, the particular silence the two of them were keeping like a shared coat. "My man," Devin said to Julian, warm, offering the hand Marcus had not been offered, and Julian shook it, brief and careful. Devin's bright eyes moved once between them, reading, always reading. And Marcus watched something pass behind his roommate's face that he had no blueprint for and would not understand until much later. Not jealousy, exactly. Recognition. The quiet arithmetic of a man realizing the door he'd been patiently holding open had a draft coming through it from somewhere else. "We should run," Devin said, still smiling. Only Marcus close enough to hear the half-step the smile had dropped. "Cousin's packing up." On the sidewalk, the cold was a clean shock after the vault's warm brass, and the three of them stood a moment in the orange sodium light while Devin went to bring the car around, leaving, deliberately, Marcus would realize, a man-shaped gap of privacy on the curb. "I don't do this," Julian said, low, his breath ghosting. "Talk. To anyone. It's how people end up in files." "I don't either." "I know." The smallest thing happened then. Julian's hand, still faintly trembling, lifted as if to touch Marcus's sleeve. Just the sleeve, just the wool, the most deniable contact a body could make, and stopped a half-inch short, hovering, the way Vaughn's fountain pen hovered over a drawing without touching it. But this hover was the opposite of that one. This one was asking. The other had only ever been claiming. Marcus did not close the half-inch. He was 18, and he had just been kissed by a man who claimed, and he did not yet know how to let himself be touched by a man who asked. But he did not step back either. For Marcus Thorne, not stepping back was a confession the size of a cathedral. A church bell somewhere counted the hour, and Julian's whole body reassembled itself into the soldier, spine first, the way a building is demolished in reverse. "Oh, 600, he said, already stepping back into the version of himself the daylight was allowed to see. "The general's reviewing the Corps Thursday. I have to be seamless." He paused, and Marcus watched him make a decision that visibly cost him. A man who lived by never leaving a record, choosing to leave one. Julian took a matchbook from his breast pocket. The Velvet Underground stamped in gold on black, and on the inside flap he wrote, in a small, careful hand, a single word and a number. Thursday, 9. "Same stool," he said, and pressed it into Marcus's palm, and his trembling fingers closed Marcus's around it for exactly 1 second, before the soldier turned and walked north into the cold, every crease regulation sharp, carrying his secret up the iron stairs into the daylight that was not allowed to know him. Devin drove them home the long way, windows cracked, the radio low, and for a while he did not perform the easy patter that was his usual weather. "He seemed like a good dude," Devin said eventually, eyes on Georgia Avenue. It was generous, and it was true, and it cost him something to say, and Marcus heard all three things. Yeah, careful though, a beat. Man in a uniform like that, with a daddy like that, he's carrying as much as you. Maybe more. Two people both holding the whole sky up. Ain't nobody got a free hand to catch the other if he falls. Marcus said nothing. In the dark of the Buick, he held the matchbook in one pocket and felt, in the other, the phantom weight of a brass key, and somewhere behind both, the unasked warmth of the man driving. 3 heats now, confusing themselves in him, and not one tool in his whole young hands for telling which one was foundation and which one was fire. Vaughn knew something had changed before Marcus said a word. Predators with patience are barometers. They read the pressure drop before the storm shows on any map. "You're lighter," he observed Tuesday, circling Marcus's drafting table in the empty studio. "Jacket off. Sleeves never rolled. Something has unclenched in your line. It's better work." The praise was a thermometer slid under the tongue. "Who?" "Nobody. I slept." Vaughn smiled at the lie the way a man smiles at a student's first competent forgery. With pride, and with the certainty that he could break it whenever he chose. "The Obsidian Fellowship Committee meets in 3 weeks," he said, changing the subject in a way that was not a change of subject at all. "I have put your name forward as my sole candidate. Do you understand what I am risking on you, Marcus? My reputation is a building too. I do not let just anyone live in it." He set the brass-bright fountain pen parallel to the table's edge, a small territorial flag. "Thursday," he said. "We refine the portfolio. I'll expect you." Thursday came with 2 doors in it, and Marcus chose the one with the iron stairs. He told himself it was rest. He told himself Vaughn would understand a single missed evening. He told himself a great many things on the walk to U Street, and the trumpet, when he reached the bottom of the steps, called every one of them a lie and forgave him for it. Julian was at the bar. Same stool. He had changed out of the dress uniform into a plain civilian sweater, and the sight of him without the brass was almost unbearable. Like seeing a building with the scaffolding finally down, the true shape of it revealed and undefended. "You came," Julian said, and the soldier's compression cracked just enough to let the relief through. "You wrote it down," Marcus said, sitting, the 8 inches between them somehow already smaller. "You never write anything down?" "No," Julian agreed quietly. "I don't." And he let that be the whole confession, because it was. They talked the way the slow-burning do, around the thing, beside the thing, everywhere but on top of it, and the talking itself became a kind of touch. Julian told him about the academy, the cold showers, the inspections, the older cadet who had once been disappeared mid-semester and never spoken of again, a lesson taught by absence. He told him how he'd learned to still his hands before formation by pressing them flat against cold metal, how the tremor only came out at night, in the dark, in rooms like this one, when the body finally admitted what the day had cost. "It's not fear," he said, turning his palm up on the bar, looking at it like it belonged to someone he was responsible for. "It's the holding. You hold a thing rigid long enough, it shakes when you set it down. Bridges do it. They call it resonance," Marcus said. "When the load and the structure find the same frequency and the bridge starts to move on its own." Julian looked at him then, fully. the aquatic scent of him close in the candlelight. "Yeah," he said, "resonance." And under the bar, slow, unrecorded, Marcus laid 2 fingers across the back of that trembling hand and held it still. Neither of them looked down at the hands. That was the rule the room had taught them. You could have the thing, but you could not witness yourself having it, because witness was the first page of a file. So they looked straight ahead at the old man and his horn, 2 faces lit gold, and underneath the lip of the bar, Marcus's fingers stayed across Julian's knuckles. And slowly, the way set concrete cures, the way the strongest changes happen without spectacle, the tremor in Julian's hand went quiet. "That's the first time today," Julian said, barely moving his mouth. "The first time what?" It stopped. The horn climbed. The woman in bronze silk hummed under it, and Marcus Thorne, who had been kissed that month by a man who wanted to own him, learned in a candlelit basement the difference between being claimed and being steadied, learned it through 2 fingers and a held breath, and understood, with the part of him that drew music rooms into buildings that had no music programs, that he had just been handed the only blueprint that had ever mattered, and that he had no idea yet how to keep it from being taken. Devon was awake when Marcus came in past 1, sitting up in the dark with the streetlight cutting across the Howard Bison hoodie, and he did not pretend to be asleep. "You were with the soldier?" "Devon, I'm not." Devon stopped, scrubbed a hand down his face, started again gentler. "I'm glad. I am. I just need you to hear me one time, and then I'll leave it alone." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You got that man in the suit moving your walls around at midnight and calling it teaching. My grandmother had a name for that. Said some folks don't rob you. They renovate you, move the walls till the house don't know itself, then hand you the bill and call it a gift." He looked at the trumpet case in the corner. "You finally got a door open in you, man. I watched it happen on the floor of this room in the rain. I don't want the first man to walk all the way through it to be the one charging rent. Julian's not." "I ain't talking about Julian," Devon said quietly, and the distinction sat between them, true and unfixable, the hairline fracture from before now wide enough to see by. Vaughn did not raise his voice. Men who have never been questioned in a room they chose to enter rarely need to. "You missed Thursday." He said it Friday in the office of Old Money, the Venetian light laying its disciplined gold bars across the rug. "I don't ask where you were. I find that knowing a man's distractions only makes me sentimental about removing them." He slid a leather folder across the desk. "The Obsidian Fellowship. The terms are inside. Summer in my firm. My name on everything you touch for the next decade. The committee will say yes because I have not given them the option of no. And football is over the day you sign. A patron does not share, neither does a sport." He steepled his fingers. "I will also say this once as a kindness, because you are young, and the young are careless with their exposures. A man building what you are building cannot afford to be seen in the wrong basements, with the wrong company, leaving the wrong kind of record. The world is always taking attendance, Marcus. I am offering to be the only one holding the role." The room went very cold and very quiet, and Marcus understood that the second sentence had not been advice. It had been a survey of the perimeter. Vaughn already knew there was something to threaten. He just hadn't shown the photograph yet. Thursday's core review made the threat flesh. Marcus had no reason to be near the parade ground and every reason. He went to see Julian seamless in the daylight, the version of him the world was allowed, and he stood at the rail among strangers and watched 200 cadets stand at attention under a flat white sky. And he saw the general. Vance Sterling reviewed his son's corps the way a wrecking foreman reviews a condemned block, caramel skin gone hard as kiln-fired clay, silver and pepper buzz cut, a face so deeply lined with command that it seemed incapable of any expression but judgment. He stopped in front of Julian. He said something Marcus could not hear, and Marcus watched the man he had steadied with 2 fingers, the man whose tremor he had quieted, go absolutely rigid. Not at attention, past attention, into the specific stillness of a son holding himself perfectly motionless so that his father will find nothing to correct. The general moved on. Julian breathed, and Marcus, at the rail, felt the whole architecture of the thing reveal itself at last. He had walked into the path of 2 men who used the same word, correct, and built their whole power on other people's fear of being seen. That night, Marcus did not go to the studio, and he did not sign the folder, and both of those were the loudest things he had ever not done. He sat on the floor of room 4B with his father's trumpet case across his knees and the leather fellowship folder unopened beside it. And he did the only honest engineering he knew. He drew the load path of his own life. Football here, paying for everything, carried by a body that would not last. Vaughn there, offering to take the weight. At the price of every door, every basement, every record, every Julian. And in the music room of the building, he kept drawing for a block that had been sold out from under his mother. A south-facing room, sized for a man and a horn. The part of him that nobody had taught to choose itself. He did not sign. He told himself it was indecision. It was not. It was the first wall he had ever built on purpose to keep one man out, and he was too young to know that you cannot keep a master craftsman out of a building by refusing to hand him the key. He simply finds the photograph instead. Friday, late. The rain came back the way it had on the worst night, and this time Marcus did not wait to be found on the floor. He carried the trumpet case to the one place it had ever felt safe to set anything down. The velvet underground was nearly empty. Julian was there, civilian sweater, same stool, and when he saw the case in Marcus's hand, his trained face did something undisciplined. "My father's," Marcus said. "I haven't opened it since the funeral. You don't have to." "I know." He set it on the bar between them, 2 latches, a held silence. "I just wanted it in a room that listens." And the old trumpet player, who had watched 1,000 grieving men come down his iron stairs, crossed the floor without a word, looked at the case, looked at the boy, and offered, not to take it, only to sit with it. The 3 of them stayed like that while the rain ran the city overhead. 2 trembling men and 1 steady horn. Nobody asking the others for anything, which is the rarest architecture there is. It was waiting under the door of room 4B on Saturday morning, in a plain envelope with no name, the way the note had come, the way the dangerous things always came, quietly, and already inside the house. Marcus opened it on the cold linoleum with Devon still asleep. A photograph. Black and white, grainy, shot from across a dark street through the orange sodium light. The curb outside the velvet underground. 2 figures on the sidewalk. A young man in a pressed dark coat, and a young man in a Navy ROTC dress uniform every brass button catching the streetlight, his trembling hand lifted toward the other's sleeve and stopped a half-inch short. On the back, in fountain ink the color of dried blood, the impeccable hand. Some records cannot be unmade, Mr. Thorne. Sunday, my office. We will discuss the terms of your discretion. A.V. Marcus knelt on the floor of the dorm with the general's son in his hands and the architect's signature on the back, and understood that the kiss had never been the cornerstone. This was. He had walked into the daylight thinking he was choosing between two warm rooms, and a third man had quietly been building the walls of a cage around all of it. With a single photograph for a keystone, and Julian's whole life for the load it would have to bear.
Before the soldier. Now someone wants to own him.
Dawn came into room 4B the way bad news comes. Gray, and already in the room before you wake. Marcus Thorne knelt on the cold linoleum with the photograph in both hands and did not move. Behind him, the bed springs shifted. Devon was awake. Devon had been awake, Marcus understood, for longer than he was pretending. Marcus. Devon's voice had none of its Atlanta music in it. What's in your hands? It was not a question, because Devon never asked questions he already knew the answer to. Marcus turned the photograph face down against his chest, the oldest reflex he had, protect the evidence. And Devon watched him do it, and something in his broad, warm face closed like a door. Practice was the only church Marcus still trusted. On the field, the loads were honest, and the collisions were legal, and nothing wanted anything from him that a body couldn't pay. He ran his routes clean, the wide receiver with the softest hands on Howard's roster, and for 90 minutes the photograph did not exist. When the coach barked the wrong man's name for a blown assignment, it was Devon, linebacker's shoulders, Bison Navy, who stepped into the gap and took a blame that wasn't his. He didn't look at Marcus when he did it. That was the tell. The locker room emptied the way it always did. Loud, then less, then the particular echo of a tiled room with two men left in it. Steam hung in the fluorescent light. Marcus sat on the bench half out of his pads, and Devon, 3 lockers down, took longer than he needed to unlace his cleats. They had shared this room for 11 weeks. They had shared the dorm for 11 weeks. There was a third thing they had shared once, at 2 in the morning, that neither of them had named since. And it was in the room now, sitting between them like a third man nobody had introduced. "You walk slow again," Devon said finally, not turning around. "On the field, you're fast. Everywhere else, you've been walking like a man carrying a piano up a staircase." Marcus said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Devon set his cleats down, squared his shoulders, and for 1 second looked like he might cross the 3 lockers between them. Then he didn't. He pulled his gray hoodie over his head, the smell of dryer sheets and cornmeal and something steadier than either, and said, to the wall, "Whenever you ready, I'm not going anywhere." It was the kindest threat Marcus had ever been handed. Back in the dorm, alone, Marcus laid the photograph on the desk and turned it over to the handwriting he already knew by heart. "Some records cannot be unmade, Mr. Thorne. Sunday, my office. We will discuss the terms of your discretion." He read it the way he read a failing blueprint, looking for the load that would bring it down. The photograph was not about him. He could survive being seen. The figure in the Navy uniform with the trembling hand could not. Vaughn had not photographed a kiss. He had photographed a leash and handed Marcus the other end. He took the bus to U Street because the bus had no corners to decide in. The November cold had teeth now. He told himself he was going to warn Julian, and that was true. And he told himself that was the only reason, and that was not. Some part of him needed to stand in the one room where his own silence had finally been allowed to set something down. He did not yet know how he would warn a man without telling him the thing that would frighten him most, that a stranger now owned a photograph of his trembling hand, lifted half an inch toward a sleeve. The iron stairs, the single red bulb, the warm amber rising to meet him, the velvet underground took him in the way it always did, without asking what he'd brought. Cleon was on the stage, the old trumpet player with hands like cracked riverbeds, pulling a long, low note out of the brass that made the whole vaulted room lean toward him. And at the curve of the bar, in a plain dark sweater instead of the uniform, sat Julian, off-duty, watchful, his hands not yet still. He saw Marcus on the stairs, and something in his trained face came undone, just slightly, the way a fist comes undone. Marcus sat one stool away and then, deliberately, moved to the next. The 8 inches he had measured so carefully in the studio meant something different here. "You came back," Julian said. "I keep coming back," Marcus said, and meant it as a confession. He wanted to say, "A man has a picture of us, and he will use you to own me." He looked at Julian's hands, finally steady around the glass, steadied by nothing but the room and Marcus's nearness, and he could not do it. He chose the lie of omission, the architect's favorite material. He let Julian have one more night unafraid. Devon was idling at the curb in the borrowed Buick when Marcus came up the iron stairs into the cold. Devon, who had not been asked, who had simply known where Marcus would go and gone to bring him home. They drove in a silence that had weight now. Streetlights ran across the windshield like passing years. "The soldier," Devon said at last, not a question. "Yeah." Devon nodded slowly, both wrists draped over the wheel, and Marcus watched his friend's jaw work around something he had clearly decided weeks ago that he was going to say tonight whether the world was ready or not. Room 4B at 1 in the morning, a single bar of streetlight across the floor. Devon did not turn on the lamp. He sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, and for once the easy Atlanta grin was nowhere on him. "I held you," he said, "in September. The night you came in looking like the inside of a collapsed building. I held you, and you let me. And then the next morning we both acted like it was the catfish grease talking." Marcus stood very still inside the doorway, the oldest posture he owned, the one that kept buildings and feelings from moving. "I'm not saying it to make you owe me something," Devon went on. "I'm saying it because I watched you walk down some iron stairs tonight toward a man in a uniform, and I realized I've been waiting 11 weeks for you to walk toward me like that, and you're not going to." He said it without bitterness, which made it worse. "I held you first, Marcus. I just don't think I'm the one who gets to keep you." The radiator ticked. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. Marcus understood he was being handed the truest thing anyone at Howard had offered him, and that he could not give it back in kind. He made himself speak, which for Marcus was its own structural event. You held me when I didn't know I was falling, he said. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what that was. Devin waited, generous even now. But my hands are full of men who frighten me, Marcus said. One who wants to own me. One who's going to lose everything just for sitting next to me. And you're the only one who never scared me at all. And I think that's exactly why I can't. It was the most honest engineering he had ever done, and it cost him a wall he would have to rebuild somewhere else. Devin took it the way he took everything, without flinching, without rushing to fill the silence, letting it sit until it stopped being unbearable and started being true. Okay, he said at last. Just that. He lay back on his bed and laced his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling, and after a while he said, into the dark, "He better be good to you, the soldier, or I'm a linebacker and I know where U Street is." And Marcus, against every blueprint, laughed, one quiet broken sound, and felt a wall he'd always needed turned somehow into a door. He did not sleep. He lay in the dark and let himself go back just once to September, the rain, the first week, the homesickness he'd had no name for because he'd never had a home loose enough to miss. He had come in soaked and shaking, and Devin had not asked a single question. Devin had just crossed the room and put his arms around him the way you hold something that is about to come apart, and held on until it didn't. The first hands to reach him in months. Marcus had spent every week since pretending he didn't remember the exact temperature of being held. Monday, the studio. Vaughn was already there when Marcus arrived, jacket off, sleeves never rolled, a single fountain pen laid parallel to the table's edge like a flag planted on territory. "You look tired, Mr. Thorne," he said, not looking up. "Late nights are the price of relevance." Or a pause, engineered to the millimeter, of indiscretion. The black pepper and patchouli and old money hung in the air. Marcus set down his drafting tube and understood that the man already knew about the bus, the bar, the stairs. Vaughn did not need to watch him. He had taught Marcus to watch himself. "Sunday," Vaughn said, finally looking up, his calculating eyes mild as weather. "My office. I think you'll find the terms generous." He circled slowly behind Marcus's shoulder, the way a man inspects a structure he intends to buy. "A fellowship. My name behind yours for a decade. Everything your father's silence could not give you." He let the cruelty of that land softly. "In exchange for very little. Discretion, distance, a photograph that stays in a drawer." Marcus kept his pencil moving, his line clean, his face a sealed wall. And inside, for the first time, he began to draw a structure of his own. Saturday came first, and with it the one honest violence left to him. The stadium under a flat white sky, the band, the navy, and the red, the legal collisions he could give his whole grief to. Marcus ran his routes like prayers, and every time the pocket collapsed, every time a body came for him from the blind side, it was Devin who was there. Linebacker's build turned bodyguard, putting himself between Marcus and the hit without being asked, the way he had put himself between Marcus and everything since September. Out here, the protection had a name and a number. It was the only place Devin was still allowed to keep him. Fourth quarter, the ball in the air, and for one suspended second, Marcus was nothing but hands and flight. No photograph, no Sunday, no men in the dark with fountain pens. He came down with it in bounds, and the stadium made a sound like the inside of his own chest. When he turned, Devin was already there, helmet off, grinning the old Atlanta grin for the first time in days. And for that 1 second, the thing between them was simple again. Two teammates, one honest game, the loads all legal and all carried. Up in the stands, unseen, a man in a charcoal coat was not watching the ball. The locker room after a win is a kind of joy Marcus never learned how to join. Music, steam, bodies colliding in celebration. He sat half-dressed at the edge of it, apart as always, and across the loud, bright room, Devin caught his eye and lifted his chin. The same small, encouraging gesture from the jazz club, the one that said, "I see you," all the way over there. Nothing had been fixed between them. Devin had been refused, and they both knew it. And still he chose, again, to be glad in Marcus's direction. Marcus thought, this is what a foundation is. Not the thing you build, the thing that keeps standing after. That night, Marcus took out the small black and gold matchbook Julian had pressed into his palm outside the club, the one with a phone number written inside the flap in a careful, disciplined hand. He held it for a long time. A matchbook was a small thing to set against a general, a professor, a photograph. But it was the only door Julian had given him, and Marcus had learned this autumn that the smallest openings were the only ones that ever mattered. He did not call it yet. He laid it in the drawer beside the brass key, where the dangerous and the precious had learned to keep each other company. He found Julian the next evening at the edge of campus, between the ROTC building and the dark, where a cadet could be seen talking to another man without it meaning anything yet. "There's something I have to tell you," Marcus said, and got that far, and watched Julian's trained eyes go to the exits out of pure habit, and lost his nerve at the cliff edge of it. "Be careful who sees you," he said instead. "That's all." Julian almost smiled. "I've been careful my whole life," he said. "It's the one thing I'm good at." And Marcus thought, not careful enough. Not against this. He understood the shape of the danger because he had seen the man who made it. He had watched, weeks ago, General Vance Sterling walk a parade ground and stop in front of his own son, and he had watched Julian go past attention into the specific stillness of a boy holding himself motionless so his father would find nothing to correct. A general who could do that to his son in public would do anything about a photograph in private. Vaughn did not even need to release it. He only needed Julian's father to be exactly who he already was. The cage did not require new bars. It required only the world as it already stood. Devin found him on the steps of Drew Hall the next morning. 2 coffees, no questions. "I've been thinking," Devin said, "about the man with the picture." Marcus had told him almost nothing. Devin had assembled the rest the way he assembled a body's diagnosis, from symptoms. "I can't make him give it back," Devin said. "But I can be the thing in the room he didn't count on. You don't walk into that office Sunday by yourself, you hear me? You don't have to keep the silence alone. That's the part nobody ever taught you." He pressed the coffee into Marcus's hands. "Drink. You look like a collapsed building again." Saturday night, Marcus sat on the floor of room 4B with his back against the bed frame and did the only honest engineering he knew. He drew the load path of the thing, Vaughn at the top holding the photograph, the fellowship, the future. Julian at the bottom, bearing all of it, a young man, who would break under a weight he didn't know was on him, and himself in the middle, the span between them, the part of every structure that decides whether the load reaches the ground or brings the whole thing down. He could sign and keep Julian safe by disappearing into Vaughn's name, or he could refuse and learn what refusal costs. He pulled his father's trumpet case out from under the bed and set it across his knees, the way he had the night everything started. He still had not opened it. His father had kept his grief sealed in brass and silence and passed both down without a word, and Marcus had inherited the silence like a mortgage. He pressed his thumbs against the two latches and did not open them. Not yet. But he understood, sitting there, that every man in this story was holding something shut. Julian his fear, Vaughn his hunger, Devon his hurt, and Marcus the one case that might tell him who he was supposed to become. He went to the Velvet Underground one last time before Sunday. Julian was at the same stool, and the 8 inches were gone now, the two of them shoulder to shoulder, while Cleon played and Miss Odessa sang something slow about leaving. Under the lip of the bar, where no one could see, Marcus laid 2 fingers across the back of Julian's hand and stilled the tremble that lived there. Neither of them looked at the other. Both of them looked at the trumpet. It was the most either of them had ever said out loud, and the room, the one room that listened, kept it, the way it kept everything, in the dark, off the record. Sunday morning, Devon was up before him, dressed, sitting on his own bed with his forearms on his knees, watching Marcus knot a dark tie like a man preparing for a sentencing. "I'll drive you," Devon said. "I'll be outside the whole time. You walk out that office on your own 2 feet. We go get catfish. You don't walk out in 20 minutes. I'm coming up those stairs, and I don't care whose 3-piece suit is in the way." Marcus looked at his roommate, his teammate, the first hands that ever held him, the love. He could not return and had not lost. "Okay," he said. It was a whole language in one word. Vaughn's office was on the top floor, behind a heavy door of old oak, and the Venetian blinds laid parallel bars of cold gold light across the rug like a cell drawn in advance. Vaughn sat behind the vast leather-topped desk with the leather folder squared to the edge, and, beside it, face up, the photograph. 2 figures on a night sidewalk, a trembling hand lifted toward a sleeve. "Mr. Thorne," Vaughn said, and gestured to the single chair with the surgical elegance of a man who had never been told no in a room he chose to enter. "Sit. Let's discuss the terms of your discretion." Marcus stepped inside, and the bars of light fell across him. He did not sit. That was the first thing. A small refusal, but Vaughn's eyes registered it the way a seismograph registers the tremor before the quake. "You photographed his hand," Marcus said quietly, "not mine. You knew I'd survive being seen. You went looking for the one of us who wouldn't." Vaughn smiled, unhurried, and folded his fine hands. "I went looking," he said, "for what you love. It is always the load-bearing wall, Mr. Thorne. You, of all people, should know what happens when you take it out." Outside, in the cold, a linebacker leaned against a borrowed Buick and watched the top-floor window. And Marcus Thorne, 18 years old, opened his mouth to say the most expensive word he owned. He did not sit. He had decided that on the stairs, and he held to it now. Standing in the cell of gold light, the blinds laid across Vaughn's rug. The photograph was face up on the desk between them. Two men on a night sidewalk, a trembling hand lifted half an inch toward a sleeve. "You went looking," Marcus said, "for what I love, because you knew I'd survive being seen. He won't." Vaughn folded his fine hands, unhurried. "Say the word, Mr. Thorne. I want to hear which one you choose." And Marcus Thorne, 18 years old, said the most expensive word he owned. "No." The office did not thunder. Vaughn only smiled, the way a man smiles when a door he built clicks shut. "Then we'll see," he said softly, "what a photograph is worth." The locker room took him back the way it always did, the one honest church left to him. He'd come straight from the office, tie still knotted like a noose, and stripped out of the good clothes into nothing but a towel and the steam, because he needed a room where the collisions were legal and the weight was his to carry. Devin found him there, 3 lockers down, shirtless and half-dressed from the afternoon lift, the linebacker's chest and the bison ink on his shoulder catching the fluorescent light. He read Marcus in one glance, the shaking hands, the noose of a tie coiled on the bench, the way he read a broken root. "You said no," Devin said. "Not a question." "Yeah," Devin exhaled slow, like a man bracing a wall. "Then we got work to do, 'cause a man like that don't let no just sit there." That night, Marcus took the bus to U Street and told Julian the truth he'd been swallowing for a week. The photograph, the leash, the trembling hand a stranger now owned. Julian went very still, the trained stillness of a boy raised under a general. "Then let me end it first," he said. "I'll resign the Corps before he can send it. My father can't burn what I hand him myself." His hands, for once, did not shake. They were steady with the terrible calm of a man volunteering to fall. "No," Marcus said. And it was a different no than the one he'd given Vaughn, softer and more frightening for it. He reached up and took Julian's steady jaw in his hand and closed the 8 inches he had measured all autumn and kissed him. Slow, certain. The first honest thing either of them had built. "We don't fall on his sword," Marcus breathed against his mouth. "We take the sword." Room 4B. The next morning, 2 coffees, no questions, Devin's whole vocabulary of love. "You've been trying to out-silence a man who taught silence for a living," Devin said. "That's a losing route, Thorne. You don't fight paper with your fists, and you don't fight it alone in the dark either. That's the part nobody ever taught you. So what do? We go where they keep the paper." Devin was already lacing the sneakers he never wore off the field. "Basement of the Union. Free legal clinic, manger de bois de Bimain. Puzzle 2 fois. Used it for a slumlord. Law students, real ones, sharp as knives and cheap as free." He pressed the coffee into Marcus's hands. "You walk in there with me tomorrow. We make his secret their problem." The clinic was a windowless room under the student union that smelled of old carpet and toner. 3 folding tables, a wall of dented filing cabinets, a hand-lettered sign that read "Intake 2 to 5." And behind the far table, not looking up from a legal pad, sat a young woman who would one day be the most dangerous attorney in any room she chose to enter. Sloane Kensington was 24, a second year with flawless dark skin and razor-sharp cheekbones, her hair already pulled into the beginnings of that unforgiving low knot, a charcoal blazer sharp as a verdict. She let them stand a full 10 seconds before she spoke. "If it's a roommate dispute," she said, still writing, The resident advisor is upstairs. Devin grinned. Marcus did not. It's a professor, Marcus said, with a photograph. Her pen stopped. She looked up then, and her eyes did the thing Marcus's did, took the measure of a room, priced every load. Names, she said. He gave one, Vaughn. Something moved behind her face, quick and cold, and was gone. Sit, she said, and this time it was an order he obeyed, because she had earned it in a syllable. She listened without softness while he laid it out in clean architectural lines. The leash, the fellowship, the boy who'd break. When he finished, she set her pen down parallel to the pad's edge, and Marcus noticed the precision of it and understood he had found something rare, a mind built like his own. Here's your problem, Sloane said. You've been trying to make him stop. You don't beg a predator, Mr. Thorne, you document him. And documentation, she almost smiled, is just architecture that holds up in a room full of enemies. They came together after hours in the clinic's back room. Marcus, Devin, Julian in a low cap and civilian clothes, and Sloane at the head of the table like a general planning a siege. It should have felt like fear. Instead, for a moment, it felt like the thing Marcus had never had a word for. Devin brought food, because Devin always brought food. Julian sat close enough that their knees touched under the table, a small, brave geography. Sloane sketched the shape of men like Vaughn, how they insulate, how they erode, how they never keep the weapon in their own hand. And Marcus, watching the three faces bent toward the same problem, felt the strangest sensation move through his chest. He was not carrying it alone. He did not yet trust how much he wanted that. Sloane put them to work like a foreman. A man doesn't start at blackmail, she said. He practices. There's a first one and a second one, and a paper trail of students who transferred, withdrew, went quiet. She taught Marcus to read a personnel file the way he read a load path, following the stress to where it disappeared. By the third night, they had a name that recurred and then stopped recurring. A fourth year, 3 years back, who'd been Vaughn's favorite, and then, abruptly, was gone from every roster. No scandal, no record, just an absence shaped exactly like a man. That, Sloane said quietly, tapping the empty space in the registry, is what he does to load-bearing walls. He removes them so cleanly, you don't notice the building's already condemned. Julian did the most dangerous thing any of them did, and he did it without being asked. He had access, cadet channels, an administrative aide who owed him, the disciplined patience of a man trained to gather intelligence. He pulled the withdrawn student's last known contact and slid it across the table, and his hand, Marcus saw, had begun to tremble again. If anyone traces this to me, Julian said, it's not a photograph anymore, it's a discharge. He closed his fingers to still them. I know what my father is. I'd rather burn standing next to you than stay safe standing next to him. Marcus took the trembling hand under the table and held it until it stopped. It was becoming the truest sentence they had. Monday, the studio. Vaughn was already there, sleeves never rolled, a single fountain pen laid parallel to the table. He did not look up. Curious thing, he said mildly. I had a call this weekend, someone in the registrar's office, asking whether old student files are, how did she put it, discoverable. He set the pen down with surgical care. You've made a friend, Mr. Thorne. A clever one. Clever people are expensive to keep and expensive to lose. Marcus kept his line clean, his face a sealed wall. But inside, something cold turned over. Vaughn had felt the investigation the way a spider feels a thread. And a man who eroded for a living had just learned that, for the first time, someone was building faster than he could tear down. Between the fear, there was this. A night at the Velvet Underground, Cleon bending a note off the brass, Miss Odessa singing something slow about staying. Marcus and Julian sat shoulder to shoulder, the 8 inches long gone, and under the lip of the bar, Marcus laid his fingers across a hand that no longer needed stilling. "When this is over," Julian said, "I want to take you somewhere with no photographs in it." "There's no such place." "Then we'll build one." Julian said it plainly, a soldier's promise, and Marcus, who built for a living and believed in nothing he couldn't calculate, believed him. It was the thing Vaughn could never touch. Not the fellowship, not the future. This, the one structure with no leash on it. Devin watched them from across the room and did not let the ache reach his face. Later, driving Marcus home through the sodium light, he said it once, so it would be said. "I see it. What you got with him?" A street light ran across the windshield. "I'm not going to pretend it don't cost me something. But you're my teammate before you're anything else, and a man protects his teammate." He glanced over, the old Atlanta warmth surfacing through the hurt. "I held you first. Turns out that don't mean I get to keep you. Just means I don't get to quit you." Marcus looked at his friend and understood he was in the presence of a rarer thing than love, a love that had been refused and stayed anyway. Sloane worked later than any of them, and one night Marcus asked her why. Why a second year with her ceiling would spend her nights in a basement chasing a tenured ghost. She didn't stop writing. "Because I watched a man like him win once," she said. "Watched the whole building bend to protect him because he was worth more standing than the girl he broke. And I decided I'd rather be the most dangerous thing in the room than ever be the softest one again." She finally looked up, and for a second the future shark showed through. "You and me, Thorn, we're the same animal. We just haven't decided yet what we're for." Marcus would remember that sentence for 17 years. The withdrawn student called back. He wouldn't testify. He had a family now, a life he'd rebuilt from the studs. But he confirmed it, voice shaking down a payphone line, and gave them one thing that mattered. He had kept a letter, Vaughn's handwriting, the same fountain ink, the same soft, surgical threat. Sloane held the facts of it up to the bad clinic light like an X-ray of a fracture. "This," she said, "is a pattern. One photograph is a he said. 2 men, 2 decades, the same pen. That's a habit. And habits," she almost smiled, "are load-bearing. Pull one out and the whole man comes down." For the first time, Marcus let himself feel it. Hope. He would learn how dangerous that was. Then the ground shifted. The clinic's supervising attorney called Sloane in. A call had come from above. A gentle institutional reminder that certain faculty were not to be harassed by students, that a second year's file access was a privilege easily revoked. Vaughn had not fought them. He had eroded the ground under them exactly as she'd said he would. Sloane came out tight-jawed. "He can't touch the evidence," she said. "So he's touching me." My standing, my clinic hours, my recommendation letters. She said it flat, but Marcus saw the cost. Doesn't matter. I've been building my whole life to not be scared of men like this. A beat. But you should know. He stopped playing careful. Careful men don't call the dean. Cornered ones do. And then the worst news. The one Marcus had been dreading in his marrow. General Vance Sterling was coming to campus. A review of the ROTC detachment, the aide said. Routine. Nothing about that man was routine. Julian went gray when he heard. Marcus found him behind the ROTC building in the specific stillness of a boy holding himself motionless so his father would find nothing to correct. If Vaughn wants leverage, Julian said, he doesn't even have to send the photo now. He just has to make sure my father's in the right room when he does. He looked at Marcus with something that wasn't fear. Worse, it was acceptance. You should stay away from me this week. For your sake. No, Marcus said, the softest, no, again. We take the sword. Together. Late, the clinic dark but for one lamp, Marcus and Sloane, the last two standing. She laid out the play like blueprints. They couldn't win in a courtroom, not yet, not with a witness who wouldn't talk, but they could make the cost of using the photograph higher than the pleasure of it. Expose the pattern quietly to the one dean who owed Sloane a favor. Box Vaughn in. It's not justice, she said. It's leverage. Learn the difference and you'll never lose a room again. Marcus looked at her. The cold precision, the refusal to be the softest thing, and felt the first beam of a bridge he'd cross for the rest of his life. When you pass the bar, he said, I'm going to need a lawyer. She didn't smile, but she wrote her number on the corner of a legal pad and tore it clean. You already do. Vaughn watched from the third-floor studio window as the four of them crossed the yard below. The receiver, the linebacker, the cadet, the lawyer-to-be, heads bent together, and then Marcus laughed at something, threw his head back and laughed, the sound too far to hear but the shape of it unmistakable, and something in Alistair Vaughn, who had never once been told no in a room he chose to enter, came quietly and completely undone. The photograph had been a leash, but a leash only works on a dog that's alone. He had watched the boy find a pack, find love he couldn't buy, and defense he couldn't erode, and he understood, with the cold clarity of a man reading his own condemned blueprint, that he had already lost the thing itself. All that was left was to make sure Marcus lost something too. He caught Marcus alone one last time on the studio stairs. No fountain pen now, no terms. You think the girl protects you, Vaughn said, and the mildness was gone. And what was underneath was worse, flat and final. You think your linebacker and your little soldier make you safe? They make you visible, Mr. Thorne, and visible things get moved. He straightened his charcoal lapel, an old reflex. I gave you a future. You chose a crowd. I want you to remember when it's over that you did this. He walked down and out into the gray, and Marcus stood on the stairs with the hair up on his arms, understanding for the first time that the danger had stopped being a photograph. That week, they had one perfect night because the story is cruel and gives you the warmth first. The four of them in room 4B, Devon's hot plate, catfish and cornmeal, Miss Odessa on a borrowed radio, Julian's knee against Marcus's, Sloane pretending she was only there for the food and staying till 2. Nobody said the word family. It sat in the room anyway, unnamed, the way the best foundations sit, underground, load-bearing, holding up more than anyone standing on them can see. Marcus lay awake after and let himself, just once, imagine an after. A place with no photographs in it. He had spent his whole life not wanting things because wanting was a load he couldn't guarantee. That night, foolishly, gratefully, he wanted. The plan was set for Friday. Sloane would hand the dossier to her dean quietly, and the box would close around Vaughn. One more handoff, the witness's letter, the pattern, the facts, from the clinic to Sloane's car after the union closed. Devin insisted on driving Marcus. Of course he did. "I put my body between you and the hit," he said, easy, lacing up in the dark dorm. "Every snap, all season. It's the one thing I know how to do without thinking." He said it like a joke. It was a joke. It was also the truest thing he would ever say, and neither of them knew yet how soon he'd prove it. Friday came in wet. The union emptied. Sloane took the folder, the letter, the facts, the pattern that would cost Vaughn everything, and told them she'd have it in front of the dean by morning. Julian walked her to the lot, scanning the dark out of a habit his father had beaten into him. Something in the parked cars felt wrong to him. He couldn't say why. A soldier rarely can until it's too late. Marcus and Devin crossed toward the Buick under a broken streetlight, the rain coming down in the sodium glow. The whole terrible week finally tipping toward over. "Catfish when this is done," Devin said, keys spinning on his finger. "You're buying, rich boy." Marcus almost smiled. He was 3 steps into the street. The car was parked wrong. That was the first thing Marcus's architect brain flagged a half-second too late. Nose out dark, no lights, idling low against the curb where no car should idle. Then the headlights snapped on, twin beams, white and blinding, and behind the wheel for one frozen instant, Marcus saw a charcoal sleeve, a face he knew, calm as weather. Vaughn. The engine climbed from idle to a roar, tires biting the wet asphalt, and the whole street narrowed to 2 lights rushing at a boy who could not make his legs move. Marcus. He heard his name in Devin's voice, the field voice, the one that called the coverage. He felt, more than saw, the mass of his friend come off the curb, the linebacker's whole body, the instinct of 11 weeks and 1 long season, moving into the gap the way it always had, without being asked before anyone knew to want it. 2 hands hit him square in the chest, hard. The world tilted. Marcus went sideways off his feet, the wet street rising to meet his shoulder, the headlight swinging away from him and toward the sound. The one the body files away forever in a room it never opens again. And the last thing Marcus Thorne saw before the dark took the frame was Devin in the light, and the light not stopping.
"Marcus, remember me? You may not have chose me, but I choose."
I wanna be with you.
The rain did not stop for it. That was the first obscene thing Marcus understood, that the sky kept doing exactly what it had been doing, indifferent, while the world ended on the wet asphalt of 4th Street. He was on his knees before he knew he'd moved. Devin lay in the sodium glow, the gray bison hoodie soaked dark, one arm flung wide, and Marcus's hands hovered over him, shaking, afraid to touch, afraid that touching would make it true. "Devin, look at me. You don't get to..." His voice broke off a cliff. Somewhere behind him, red taillights bled away into the rain at the end of the street, unhurried, a man driving off at exactly the speed of innocence. And somewhere close, Sloane's voice, flat and exact, was giving an address to a 911 operator. Julian reached them at a dead run, uniform soaked black, and did the thing he was trained to do, pressed his hands where they needed to be, spoke in the clipped calm of a man holding a line. But Marcus saw the soldier's mask over what was breaking behind it. The ambulance came apart of the rain in red pulses. They worked fast, the way people work when seconds are load-bearing, and lifted Devin, and Marcus climbed in without asking because there was no version of this where he let go of that hand. Under the cabin light, he looked down and saw the blood on his own palms and understood with a cold clarity that frightened him that it was not his. It was Devin's. And it was the only thing in the world that felt like it belonged to him. The waiting room was a purgatory of fluorescent light and vending machine hum. Marcus sat rigid, spine straight as a plumb line, hands open on his knees, palms up because he could not make himself wash them yet. Julian sat on one side of him, close, a hand on his back. Sloane sat on the other, the manila folder still clutched against her chest, the dossier, the letter, the pattern, dry. Because even here, even now, she did not set down the thing that could bring the man down. Nobody spoke. There was a clock, and it did not hurry. Marcus stared at the double doors and did the only thing his body knew how to do with terror. He began, quietly, to draw. Load path. Where the weight goes. As if a building could be engineered to hold this. To survive the waiting, he went backward, because backward was the only direction that still had Devon Hole in it. September, the rain, his first week, the homesickness he'd had no name for. Devon coming through the door at 2 a.m. with a contraband hot plate and a sack of catfish, barefoot, grinning, in that gray bison hoodie that smelled of dryer sheets and cornmeal and something steadier than either. "You've been staring at that desk for 9 hours, Thorne." Even God rested. Devon had not asked a single question. Devon had just crossed the room and put his arms around a soaked, shaking boy and held on until the shaking stopped. The first hands to reach Marcus in months. He had spent every week since pretending he didn't remember the exact temperature of being held. He remembered it now. He would remember it forever. A doctor came out once, midway, still in a cap, and spoke in the careful grammar of people trained to hand out hope in exact doses. The car had done what a car does. They were working. It was bad. They should prepare themselves and also not give up. The 2 impossible instructions delivered in one breath. Marcus asked the only question his mouth could form. "Is he awake?" "No," the doctor said gently. "He hasn't been since the street." And Marcus understood that the last thing Devon had ever done conscious in this world was put his hands on Marcus's chest and shove him toward the curb. That the final act of a life had been to spend it without hesitation, without being asked on him. Sloane found the detective before the detective found them. Marcus watched her cross the waiting room to the man in the wet overcoat and speak low and precise. And he understood he was watching the birth of something. A woman who would spend her whole life being the most dangerous person in the room, choosing tonight to point all of it at one man. She came back and crouched in front of Marcus, eye to eye. "They're calling it a hit and run," she said. "But you saw him, behind the wheel. Say it once to me now, clean, so it never changes." Her voice, did not soften. It was the kindest thing anyone could have done. "Who was driving the car, Marcus?" Marcus met her eyes. "Alistair Vaughn," he said. "I saw his face." "Then we have him," Sloane said. "Whatever else happens tonight, we have him." Word travels on a campus even at 3 a.m. Julian's phone lit with his father's name, and Marcus watched the cadet go rigid, the specific stillness of a boy raised under a general. "He's heard there was an incident," Julian said. "He wants to know if I was involved, if I was exposed." He laughed, one broken sound with no humor in it. "My best," he caught himself, chose the braver word. "The man I love is on a table, and my father wants to know if it will embarrass him." Marcus looked at him. Then, "Don't answer it." Julian silenced the phone, set it face down. It was, Marcus understood, the first order Julian had ever refused in his life, and he had refused it standing next to Marcus. That, too, would matter later. She came off a red-eye from Atlanta near dawn, still in her church coat, and the room reorganized itself around her grief, the way rooms do around the truly bereaved. Mama Price, Devon's mother. She had his exact bright eyes, and when she used them on Marcus, he braced for blame and received something worse. "You're Marcus," she said. "He wrote me about you. Every letter." She took his ruined hands in both of hers, the blood long since washed, but the memory of it not. "My boy said you were the smartest person he ever met and the loneliest. He said somebody had to stand next to you." Her voice held. That was his idea of a good time, standing next to people who needed it. Marcus opened his mouth, and nothing came out. She squeezed his hands. "Don't you dare carry this as a debt," she said. "He'd hate that. He gave it. You hear me? He gave it." They kept a vigil the way the young keep vigils, badly, refusing chairs, drinking terrible coffee Sloane kept producing from somewhere. Julian prayed under his breath in a cadence his mother must have taught him before the army taught him not to. Mama Price hummed something low. Marcus did not pray. Marcus drew load paths on the back of an intake form until the pen ran dry, and then he pressed the dry pen into the paper anyway, over and over, engraving nothing. Around 5 a.m., a machine somewhere changed its tone. Feet moved fast behind the double doors, and the particular quality of the quiet that came after told them, before any human mouth could, what the machine had already said. There are sounds the body files away forever in a room it never opens again. Marcus would keep this one his whole life, not a loud sound. The opposite, the sound of a room where a machine has stopped insisting. Mama Price made a noise that belonged to no language. Julian caught her, and Marcus. Marcus stood very straight in the fluorescent light and felt something begin to set in him the way concrete sets. Fluid one moment, and then, with no announcement, load-bearing and cold and permanent. He did not cry. Not here. Not in a fluorescent room full of strangers not standing up. He noted the stillness in himself with a clinical distance, as if observing a structure under load, and did not yet understand that he was only holding the line until he could find somewhere private to set it down. They let him see Devon after. The room was too quiet and too clean. Marcus stood at the edge of it, hands at his sides, and did not sit, because sitting was a thing you did when you intended to stay, and he did not know how to stay in a world arranged like this. "You weren't even supposed to be here," he said to the still shape of the first person who ever held him without a price. "I never asked you to come. You never asked. You just..." His hands rose an inch and stopped. You always just came. And the thing he had been building against all night, the cold, the composure, the careful straight line of his spine, gave way all at once, the way a wall gives not slowly, but in a single breath, when the load finally exceeds the span. He went down at Devon's feet. The sound that tore out of him had no architecture to it at all. It was the one thing in him grief could not organize into line. He felt her before he saw her. The smell of a church coat worn through a red eye, of Atlanta and ginger, and something steadier than either. Mama Price lowered herself to the cold floor beside him. This woman who had lost more than he had and had flown all night to do it. And she gathered him in the exact way. He understood that she must once have gathered the boy in the gray hoodie, the same arms, the same hold, Devon's warmth reaching him one last time through the person who made it. "I got you," she said into his hair, her own tears falling into it. "I've got you, baby." And so did he. Don't you dare forget he wanted to. They stayed there a long time, the two of them on the floor of a too-clean room, holding the shape of what they'd lost between them. It was the last time Marcus Thorne would let himself weep. He did not decide it there, in her arms, but something in him marked the line. The way you mark the high-water stain on a wall after the flood pulls back. This far. Never again. This is the moment, if you are looking for it. The hinge of an entire life. He had wept himself empty on the floor of that room, and into the hollow the weeping left, quietly. The concrete began to pour. 18 years old, Marcus Thorne made a decision he did not have words for and would never take back. That the soft place under his ribs, the fatherless, starving place that Devon had loved without a price, was a structural flaw, a point where the load exceeded the span, a weakness that got people killed. So he sealed it, not all at once, but it started here, in the hours after the last of his tears. He began, quietly and forever, to translate every feeling into structure and line, because structure could bear weight that feeling could not. He would build a career, a body, a self, out of everything his grief could not hold. He would call it discipline. The truth was simpler. It was a tomb with a boy in it. Hours or years later, Julian found him on a bench outside the hospital, perfectly still, perfectly composed. The most frightening thing Julian had ever seen. He sat down and put his arm around Marcus's shoulders. Those trembling soldiers' hands steady now. Steady because Marcus needed them to be, and he held him. He did not say, "It's not your fault," because grief does not take instruction. "You don't have to be okay," Julian said into his hair. "Not with me. You never have to be okay with me." Marcus let himself be held. He even leaned in, and he meant it. From the outside, it would have looked like the beginning of healing. But Julian could feel it under the embrace, the new hardness, the wall already curing. He was holding Marcus. He just wasn't sure Marcus was still all the way inside. Here is the cruelty the audience must feel. Marcus was loved. He was held and chosen, and the soldier who smelled like the ocean was not going anywhere. By every law of story, this should have been the moment he was saved. And it wasn't enough, because the lesson had already been carved, and the lesson was this: love and loss are the same beam. Devon loved me, and loving me is what killed him. The closer you let someone stand, the more of you dies when they fall. Julian held him under a graying sky, and Marcus held him back. And at the very same time, in the cold new architecture of him, he began drawing the plans for the distance he would one day put between himself and everyone, even this man, even the son they did not yet know they would have. The dorm was unbearable. Devon's side of room 4B was exactly as he'd left it. The contraband hot plate, one cleat on its side, the gray spare hoodie thrown over the desk chair, still holding the shape of his shoulders. Marcus sat on his own bed for a long time and did not touch any of it. Then he stood and squared Devon's cleat beside its pair and folded the hoodie along its seams, precisely the way you fold a flag, and set it on the pillow. It was the first thing he ever built out of grief. It would not be the last. He was learning that week that you could survive anything if you turned it into a task, that a broken heart, disassembled carefully enough, was just a set of objects that needed squaring. Vaughn did what Vaughn did. He did not flee, because fleeing is what the guilty do, and he had never once thought of himself as catchable. He lawyered. He let it be known through the right channels that a grief-stricken student's account of a rainy night was a fragile thing, that a tenured man of his standing had enemies, that these things had a way of quietly going away. He had built a career on the certainty that the world bends to protect the man worth more standing than the people he breaks. He had not accounted for Sloane Kensington. He had thought her a clever girl in a basement. He had made, for the first time in his life, an error of load. Sloane laid it out on the clinic table like a blueprint because that was a language Marcus could still hear. On their own, each piece bends, she said. Your eyewitness, a distraught kid, they'll say. The grooming dossier, a pattern, but old, protected. The car, if he scrubbed it, deniable. She set them down one atop the other. But stacked, motive, means a body and a witness who never wavered. That's not a he said anymore, Marcus. That's a structure. Each piece holds the next one up. For the first time in days, something like fire moved behind her eyes. He spent his whole life pulling out other people's load-bearing walls. I'm going to hand a prosecutor the one under him. Marcus looked at her and understood he had found the person he would call for the rest of his life. They needed Marcus to say it on the record, to sit across a table from people with badges and lawyers and repeat what he'd seen, knowing Vaughn's people would come for his grief, his youth, his every crack. Sloane didn't soften it. It will cost you, she said. They'll put your worst night on a table and take it apart. You don't have to. Marcus thought of Devon coming off the curb without being asked. He thought of a life spent about to be spent on him. Yes, I do, he said. It was the same word almost as the no he'd given Vaughn in the office, the most expensive word he owned, paid again, gladly this time. Set it up. I'll say it as many times as it takes. The reckoning, when it came, was quiet and total, the way real things are. The stack held eyewitness, pattern, forensic, motive, each piece bearing the next, exactly as she'd drawn it. A grand jury did what grand juries do when a structure is sound. And Alistair Vaughn, who had never once been told no in a room he chose to enter, was told it at last by a room full of strangers who did not care about his tailoring. Marcus sat in the back the day it turned, in his pressed black turtleneck, and watched a powerful man lose the only thing that had ever protected him, the certainty that the world would bend. He felt no triumph. He had learned from Vaughn himself how to keep his face a clean wall while something is demolished behind it. Among the things that came out, in the end, was the photograph, the leash, the trembling hand, the whole rotten architecture of it, entered into a record where it could no longer be used as a weapon because it had become evidence. Julian sat very still when he learned it would be public. Then, he did the bravest thing Marcus ever saw him do. He picked up the phone he had silenced in the hospital hall, and he called his father, the general, and he told him, before Vaughn could, before a newspaper could, before the world could hand it to him as a wound, exactly who his son was. Marcus did not hear the other end. He only saw Julian's hand trembling and then slowly going still. He hung up, Julian said. But I said it standing up. That's the part that's mine. They buried Devin in Atlanta, under a sky that had the nerve to be beautiful. Mama Price sang. The Morehouse cousins came, and the Howard team came in their navy, and the church smelled of lilies and the fried catfish reception waiting in the fellowship hall below, because grief and appetite keep company in a black church the way they always have. Marcus was asked to speak and could not. He stood at the front with his mouth a sealed wall and his hands folded, and the silence stretched, and just when it became unbearable, Mama Price rose from the front pew, crossed to him, and simply stood next to him, shoulder to shoulder, facing the room. "That's all right, baby," she said, loud enough for the mic to catch. "He was better at standing next to people than talking to. You learned it from the best." That night back in D.C., Marcus took out the one possession he had carried from Baltimore on the Greyhound, his dead father's worn leather trumpet case, the trumpet long since pawned, the case kept, empty, the shape of the absence preserved. He set it in his lap on the narrow bed beside Devin's folded hoodie, and he held the two things his grief had given him, one inherited, one earned, and he pressed his thumbs to the latches and did not open them. "I'm sorry," he said, to the case, to the hoodie, to the boy he had been in September who still believed being held was safe. "I'm so sorry." Then he closed his hands precisely and set both things on the shelf where they would stay. His father's silence, his own beginning. Before she left for her clerkship, Sloane found Marcus one last time. She did not offer comfort. She offered the truer thing, which was a future. "You're going to build," she said. "It's the only language you've got left, and it's a good one. And one day, you'll build something so big, the same kind of man who took Devin will come for it." She held out a card, her name, a number, an address that did not exist yet. "When he does, you call me. I'll have passed the bar by then. I'll be the most dangerous person in whatever room he's in." Marcus took the card. "Why?" he said. "Why me?" "Because we're the same animal," Sloane said. "And somebody has to be for something." 17 years later in Harlem, he would still have her number. Spring came to Howard the way it always did, indifferent and gold. Marcus and Julian stayed. The love survived, quieter now, marked, a thing they had carried through fire and would carry further. Julian redeclared for the army with his eyes open, his father's silence, a wall he had decided to live beside rather than inside. "I'm not going to try to fix you," Julian told him one evening on the bench where he'd first held him. "I know better. I'm just going to keep standing here, however long it takes, even if you never fully come back out." Marcus took his hand and stilled the tremble that still lived in it. and did not tell him the truth he already knew, that some part of him had stayed on 4th Street in the rain and would not be coming back. He let Julian believe in the after. It was the kindest lie he had left. The months that followed built the man. Marcus went cold and precise and brilliant. He won the fellowship, not Vaughn's, a clean one, on the strength of a portfolio that made hard men quiet. He learned to walk into a room and read it for load, for the places where the weight would fall, for the exits. He learned to be held without letting it reach him. He learned to say, "I love you" to Julian and mean it, and still, at the very same time, be drawing the distance. He built and built, and each thing he built was a wall with the same boy sealed behind it, and he called it discipline, and the world called it genius, and only he knew it was a tomb. The years did what years do. They gave Marcus and Julian a life and grief between them, and, when they least expected it, a child neither could have imagined. A small, solemn boy with Marcus's exact watchful eyes, whose existence Marcus would guard so fiercely and so silently that even the people closest to him would not know. He carried Devon into all of it. Every building he raised on a foundation he never named. Every time someone tried to stand too close, he heard the rain on 4th Street, and he made the distance, gently, architecturally, the way Vaughn had once made a cage, except Marcus built his own, and locked himself inside, and threw away nothing, because there was nothing left to throw. He never spoke Devon's name aloud again to anyone, not because it hurt too much to say, though it did, but because a name said aloud is a wall you let someone lean on, and Marcus had decided that no one would ever again lean on him and fall. But once a year, in the rain, he would stand at a window in a charcoal suit and let himself remember the exact temperature of being held by a boy in a gray hoodie who smelled of dryer sheets and cornmeal and something steadier than either. 1 minute. No more. Then he would turn back to the blueprints, and the wall would hold. And this is the thing to carry out of the vaulted past. The truth the whole ark was built to set down. Marcus Thorne was loved. He was held by a good man and defended by a brilliant woman and mourned beside a mother who refused to let him call it a debt. He was not, in the end, alone. And it was not enough, because you cannot comfort someone out of a truth they learned with their own hands, on their own knees, in the rain. He would spend 17 years being loved and staying sealed until a man with shoulder-length locks and a mustard yellow shirt walked onto a Brooklyn rooftop and refused to accept the wall as the whole building. If you have followed Marcus Thorne into the present, the charcoal suits, the silver watch, the loft like a cage of glass, the guarded eyes, the love he could barely let himself hold, then you have already met the man this rain made. Now you know the rain. You know why he goes still instead of soft. Why he reads people the way he reads buildings. Why, when Elias Vance finally cracked him open, what spilled out was not weakness, but a boy on his knees on 4th Street whispering, "You never asked, you just came." Every wall has a first stone. This was Marcus Thorne's, a roommate who loved him first and never asked, a teammate who put his body between Marcus and the hit because it was the one thing he knew how to do, a boy from Atlanta who stepped into the headlights so Marcus wouldn't have to. And who, in dying, taught Marcus the terrible lesson that would build every wall of the man we meet in Harlem. His best friend died saving him. And Marcus Thorne, held by the man he loved, in the gray light of the worst morning of his life, never let himself cry again.